my experience, my very first church was a little Cajun church in Abbeville, Louisiana, in Vermilion Parish. In Louisiana, we don't have counties, we have parishes. And my parish was the very last parish in the diocese. The next closest Episcopal church was 40 minutes away. I was in the marsh, and all of my people grew up speaking English as a second language. It's my home state, and so I was able, it was a real challenge for Adrian at first because it's a very patriarchal and at times very backward culture for outsiders. If they're coming in, they don't understand it. And then we moved from there to DC, from DC to London, where I'd been previously, and then from London to Greenville, South Carolina to Minneapolis, and then back home to Louisiana, and then over to here. I served in Paris for a year as the pastoral associate at the American Cathedral, and I was a bookkeeper there. And then I did a summer as a deacon in London. I went back to that parish a few years later, I'd already been a rector, associate rector of a corporate parish, then became a curate again, because I had to learn how to do things in the C of E. And then soon after, I knew my friend was being appointed to another living, and so I became priest in charge, and then we were back to working again, about 5 minutes away from each other. But it's great to be here, and I love working with our bishop. I loved our previous bishop, and it's a great relationship to be able to work with these people. So if you would, take a deep breath. Firstly, get comfortable. And whatever is in your heart at this time, you take a deep breath through your nose. If you can close your eyes, that's great. Let it out slowly through your mouth. And while you're breathing, just put your feet together and your legs together. Try putting your palms on top of your thighs like little teacups. Let your legs relax, keeping your feet together, and you'll see the legs kind of splay apart. You should be in a sort of relaxed posture. If none of that works for you, that's okay. Just keep breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth. Push to the edges all those things that might be crowding your heart. Anxiety, worry, fear, concern. And create that space, give that space back to God that's at the center of your being. Just keep breathing that way. Maybe notice your breathing. Perhaps you'll notice the breathing of your neighbor beside you. Let us pray. Breathe in love, life, mercy. Breathe out worry, fear, anxiety. Breathe in peace, joy, hope. Breathe out busyness, selfishness, greed. Breathe in light. Breathe out darkness. Breathe in joy. Breathe out sadness. Breathe in hope. Breathe out despair. Breathe in God's light. Breathe in God's love. Breathe in God's Spirit. Amen. If you haven't fallen asleep, you can open your eyes. Get this out of the way. So it's good to be with you all. It's my pleasure. It's my second trip to be down here, or third trip. I was here for a service with Father Ray some months back. It was in 2022. Then met with the vestry. When was that meeting? That was in February, January, something like that? Yeah. So it's good to be with you. I've never seen the inside of your meeting space, your parish hall, what do you all call that? Sorry? Gathering place. So maybe somebody will show it to me before I leave today. That would be great to see. I've given you documents. Not all. Well, the only one that's really on our website is the one you don't have. Because we're still in the process of assessing, and this is just the manual for doing a discernment. Now, your vestry has this, and when it comes time for me to meet with your search committee, they will receive a copy as well electronically. It does guide, and I walk everyone through it. I'm always available. I think Paula would tell you we've been communicating directly via text, phone calls, or emails for a good year, yes, and that's one of the things I can be away at a conference or on vacation, and I tend to always get phone calls from wardens or rectors, and that's it is a joy for me to be able to take those calls and to try to help. Occasionally I don't answer, and that's because I'm either cooking supper or I'm trying to do something with the kids, even though they're not that little, 21 and 19. We were older parents when we had kids. I was 46 and 44, and so it's an interesting time to be 65 and having 2 kids still living at home. But it's good to be with you. What I'd like to do first is just walk you through one document, and then I'm going to go into detail with another, because it will guide our conversations. Is that okay? All right. And if you have a question, if you stand and just tell me your name, because it's hard to see your name tags from here. I see everyone's wearing them. I know some of the names, but just identify yourself, and it'll be a test for me later if I remember you if you ask a second question, okay? The first one, you may have seen a variation. This is called How a Priest is Called. This ran, well, slightly edited just to bring it up to date. This ran in Southern Cross in 2018. And so you may have seen a copy of it. This walks you through everything that we're going to talk about, because I've given you a flow chart that really, really helps, I think, to understand how the process works and how we get from point A to the call of a rector and the settlement of a rector, okay? But this will have details in it. Have a read of it. If at times you get bored while I'm speaking, you want to look at this and then you have some other questions, you'll notice on the back there are notes. I encourage you to write your notes. You can also write questions, and I'll be glad to take any of those questions as well. But this is just a reference for you. I'm not going to walk you through it, to tell you a little bit more in detail about how this process works. What I'd like to do is to look at the flow chart, because this is really important, and there will be times where we can talk about when we get to a certain point, or if you're at a certain point, okay? So I'm going to talk to you as if, it's just been announced that Father Ray left, and he's just left, just to bring us through sequentially so we don't jump ahead of ourselves, okay? You all okay with that? So we're on page 1 of the one that's entitled Calling a New Rector Process, Timeline Overview. So at the very beginning, the rector meets with the bishop to discuss their departure. The rector announces departure, and then both wardens meet. Usually it's both wardens. Sometimes it can only be the senior warden. They just speak with the bishop about the rector's impending departure, their desire for an interim, the state of the congregation, anything that they have on their mind. That's a time for them to talk to the bishop. After that, I'm invited to come down or go up, depends on where I'm headed. I'll be going up to Plant City in just a couple weeks to have one of these meetings with the vestry there, because their rector just announced that she's departing for Michigan at the end of the month. So then I go and meet with the vestry. I try to lay out how our process works. This is new. I created this back in, did I give it to you when I came? Yeah, so I just created it then. Yep, so it's a new document. We never really used it. My predecessor was here 20 years. He's my neighbor. He lives literally 3 minutes from my house. I see him walking his grand dogs when they have them, and we pass his house every day when we walk our dogs. So I inherited that document, that manual, and I still use it, but I've made some tweaks. Respect your elders, those who've come before you, who have a lot of experience, and then as you live into something, you see what works and what doesn't work. And of course, now with the new bishop, we're in the process of tweaking lots of different things, and so that's welcome to our world at Diocesan House. Blessed are the flexible, for they will not get cheesed off. Good, you laughed a little bit. All right. So then, the Canon of the Ordinary, I come down and I meet with the vestry. The vestry forms 4 subcommittees. These are really critical subcommittees, because some heavy lifting can be done at the early end, and it's not that heavy. It's important lifting. It's really more like low-hanging fruit. So you have 4 subcommittees. The first is a compensation subcommittee, then a website committee, then a self-study committee, and then a profile subcommittee. So the first 2 that can be dealt with pretty quickly or at the front end before you get into doing any self-study, or the compensation and the website. I will tell you, every parish website should be updated at least every 5 years. When I meet with vestries, oftentimes I'll pull up their website and I'll say, let me ask you some questions about this. Not as criticism, but just to let you see what an outsider sees. I'll tell you a story. I moved here in 2018. My family were still living in Louisiana, waiting for school to end. I was renting a place on Clark Road, and there was a church I was going to go to. I'd never been there. It was one of our island churches. And I go on the website, and it says, in season, our services are X, X, and X. Out of season, they are X, X, and X. And I said, bloomin' heck, when is season for this congregation? Never did they have a calendar date. So one is to have to guess. And there was an hour-and-a-half difference of services. So these are the things that I would look at when I come in. I looked at your website. It's pretty good. Y'all are doing good on that. That's an easy, there's always more work to do. Y'all have some people or one or two people working on it, right, Paula?
Correct.
Okay. Compensation subcommittee. That's really important because when it comes to people searching, I will tell you what a priest usually looks at. Usually the first thing they look at is the number, the financial, because usually they're having to decide, is it a lateral move or an upward move? Because if they have a family or a spouse, they have to think about planning. Not always do they move up. Sometimes it is lateral, sometimes they go down. Twice in my ministry, I've gone down because of the work experience. Going to England, let me tell you, I went from being well in D.C. to being in poverty level in England. But, you know, it was an adventure in life, and my wife and I, we agreed that was something we wanted to do. And then when I moved to Minneapolis, I took a $20,000 pay cut because I wanted the experience to work in a cathedral. It was life-changing. Our children grew up in that church. My wife just happened to be back to surprise people, and it was great for her because she was honored in her individuality from my priesthood. You know, we weren't a double package, as it were, you know. And so she went back, and there were lots of tears and photographs, and I got to see stuff on Facebook. And so the experience of going, even though I took a pay cut, made it up over the years, but what I gained in experience was priceless. But I will tell you that oftentimes, before anyone will look at a profile, they're going to want to see what the number is. And I just have to be honest with you about that. Because we now live in a time where housing costs are absolutely crazy. On my street, it's just bonkers right now, you know. So that is a reality. I'll, you know, speak more with the vestry about it and the search committee. But just to tell you that, so when you work with the compensation committee, that's not something that that subcommittee does in isolation. I encourage them to reach out to John Edgar, who is our director for congregation support. He's the one that works with all of our congregations when it comes to budgetary things, particularly in getting ready for a search, and also before a letter of agreement is signed. John and I review it for content. I look at it for canon law, other things. John looks at it for benefits, and then also sustainability, viability in their budget. So John is able to do things. Just recently I connected Paula with John through an email. He's really game. He also supplied y'all with a snapshot of the congregation, which is a handy tool to see who you are. You add that to the mix of what you'll be doing with Holy Cow, and you get a good picture of yourself. So those are the first two subcommittees. The next subcommittee would be the self-study, and it's probably a good time we can just pause and talk about Holy Cow, shall we? So you pull out this one, and Holy Cow is all one word, capital C in the middle. When Bishop Doug came on board, we were talking about how parishes did their self-studies. And I will tell you, you know, I've only been here just over 5.5 years almost. I have seen lots of different quality in self-created self-studies. Some parishes have been blessed to have someone in their congregation who's actually done something like this, perhaps even professionally. Sometimes they have a small group of people that create a document, but sometimes the document only gives them numbers. It's hard to tell your story with only numbers. And then, for a while, we were suggesting one, because we didn't mandate anything. One of the other options was the Hartford Institute. They're a good organization up in the Northeast, and they could help you do a self-study. But again, there's no standardization. So when Bishop Doug came on board, he said, you know what I'd really like to do? And he had used this at Tequesta while he was a rector there. He said, I'd like to use Holy Cow. I've heard about Holy Cow. They used it at the cathedral when I was leaving, when they were looking for a new dean. One of our rectors in Tampa used it at his 6-month mark of his rectorship. to sort of give him an assessment, because their self-study was, it was all right, but also take the temperature on how things are now as they begin to really forge out into the next chapter. So Doug said he was going to require, and bishops can do this, every parish to use Holy Cow, because what you're going to get the results of an assessment tool that gives you lots of information. And the information is going to give you where you've been, where you are now, where you're going. Plus, it'll talk about any underlying undercurrents of things that are moving through the parish. The key is that respondents are honest and thoughtful, because we can't, what is it? Garbage in, garbage out. So it's only as good as what y'all give. So when it comes time to this, it's an electronic tool, though y'all should have provision also for people to come in. I think y'all are doing it here to help people who want to do it online. I had one church, they did a great survey. It was all by hand, and then the poor senior warden spent 2 weeks trying to extrapolate data out. The good news is Holy Cow does it for you. If you notice down at the bottom, they have a sliding scale for the fees. And you may be asking, so you require all churches? For instance, St. John's in Brooksville, little small church in the northern end of the diocese, they had to do this. They were so grateful they did. But we helped underwrite them because their budget is so really tiny, okay? And so congregations, I don't know where you fit on this right now. Are you probably in the average Sunday attendance? Are you in the 149, below 149? Yeah, so you're getting a deal, $450 for the tool itself. And then they will meet with you. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks to actually complete the tool and for them to get their data into you. They will meet with you, your leadership that is, either in person, and there's a cost for that. I think it's $1,500 plus travel costs, or they'll do it virtually. Right now, all the congregations that have used it are just doing it virtually, just to save some money in this time. I can tell you who's used it most recently. Brooksville, Christ Church Bradenton, a big church. They're getting ready to go live next week. And then Sun City Center, St. John the Divine, they used it. They're getting ready to go live probably next week, if not the next week. It just depends on timing. So it's a great tool. And then if you do a virtual review of the assessment, it's only $450. And you're getting your money's worth because you're having some pros who do this not just for churches, but also, they do in the secular world. They do a lot of churches, not just the Episcopal churches, but they know our language. They know when to substitute pastor with rector, or board of elders for vestry, or diocese to synod, things like this. So they know how to maneuver in our language, in our polity, so that's a very helpful thing. And so far, everyone that's used it has given me nothing but glowing reports, and they're grateful for it because it gave them insight, and it took a heavy burden off them from trying to do it by themselves. Any questions on that? None? Easy peasy. All right. Then the last subcommittee is the profile committee. There are 2 profiles that the profile committee has to complete. One is in the Office for Transition Ministry, OTM. You'll hear me say OTM a few times. You will hear your vestry and search committee probably talk about OTM. OTM is an arm of the Episcopal Church. It is our database. And that is where clergy upload their personal profiles, and it has all sorts of data, their name, how long they've been a priest, where they serve, what their current compensation is, if they want to give that, but it will say what compensation is required if they're to consider a new call. And then there are a whole series, I think it's 12 questions they answer, and parishes answer a similar profile. Questions are tweaked just a little bit. Like, how do you deal with conflict? Tell us about a moment in your ministry that you count as a moment of success and it was life-giving. How have you negotiated change in your congregation? When did it go well? When did it not go so well? How are you engaging in the church beyond the walls of your church, your local community? So it's great ways for us to have some insight into who each parish are. And it's good for a priest to ask those questions as well. And so what I do when it's time for me to do a search, just to tell you how the OTM is used by my office, For instance, Nativity Sarasota, they're down to finalists now. I looked most recently at 550 OTM profiles as possible candidates. Took a little while. I do it online, and then what I did is I went through and I could select the ones out that I could see right away were either up to date, out of date, really weren't a good match. And then I pared it down to even a smaller number. And I think that number was 225. And then I did a deeper dive with the 225, and I got down to about 75. And those I looked at very, very carefully. I'd go to their websites. You know, you want to make sure they're still where they are, that stuff is factual. And then sometimes people move and they don't update their profile. That happens a lot. And then from there, I invite a certain number to apply. Kind of like those of us who remember the brush salesman, Fuller brush salesman? You remember those? I do cold calling. I do it through email. And I pitch as best we can. We also advertise through Episcopal News Service, and we put it on our website. And then I share it with all my colleagues in the Episcopal Church, all the other transition ministers. And ENS will give us, Episcopal News Service will give us a free listing for a period of time, but I always recommend vestries to invest in having it, their word for promoting, I can't remember what their word for it, where it moves to the top always. And so you pay a fee for that because you're getting highlighted as it is. And that's about $450, and it's well worth it because it just means you move to the top. There are a lot of clergy positions being sought to be filled right now. And so, you know, the OTM is one way. I don't always get a lot of return on that investment, but I've had a few, and so we don't want to give it up just because. Oftentimes it's by word of mouth. I can tell you that there are a couple priests around here who are here only by word of mouth through who I knew in other places, okay? For instance, one of your neighbors not too far away, Sanibel, Bill Van Oss, we served together in Minnesota. And so, funny, about the time I was getting ready to give him a call, he called me. But also priests who we've settled have been in searches here before. And so I keep a roster of all those. And people I know somebody. That's really how it works. But that's the Office for Transition Ministry profile. The other one is you take your data that you get from your assessment tool. That will help answer some of those questions. And then you're going to write a profile for the parish. I call it the narrative parish profile. In the old days, we used to print them as a book. They're still made that way, but we just send that, everything out is electronic now, okay? We don't do any paper on anything because no one's doing that anymore. And then on both the OTM profile and the narrative profile, I have to approve it before it goes live. Because I'm here to tell you, I've only done this for 5.5 years, but I've been a priest 30 years, and I've been in a lot of searches, and I know what priests read when they see certain things written. So if I see something, I'll say, you're confusing here, this is not actually the language we should use in the Episcopal Church. Or then I'll say, let me tell you what I see right here. You may not realize you're saying this, but a priest is going to hear this. And I try to help those who are usually, and I only communicate with the senior warden during this time. It's going to be her job to relay any of my edits back to the committee. Because we want you to have the very best document and best OTM profile so that people want to apply, okay? And so that's what I look at. And once I give the okay on that, then that's a good thing. You'll be able to start working, you know, on the front end of that by having your Holy Cow, and that begins August 17th or 15th? 17th, yep. Great. Any questions on those? Am I talking too much?
Canon.
Yes.
The OTM profile, is that available online for somebody to start looking at? Like start writing the answers?
I'll send you the fill-in.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
The way that works is I give a document, a fill-in document to the senior warden. When it's completed, it comes back to me and I upload it all. And you have to be real, I'll tell you as senior warden, you'll need to know this, that you're restricted, clergy are restricted the same way on any of the narrative portions to 1,200 characters, spaces. Yeah, so, you know, if you space a lot, you eat up space. You know, it's real estate. And if you exceed 1,200, it won't upload. And I don't go back and try to fix it, so I'll have to send it back and say, a third of your answer got cut off. Or because you can do a word count. I always tell people, just do a word count, word, space, and stroke count, and that'll save you from having any difficulty, okay? That was a great question, though. Remind me when we leave. That's on your to-do task. Make sure I send that to you.
Yep, I will.
Are you writing it down?
Yeah.
Or it's just in your brain?
It's in my brain.
Okay. I'll see how good the brain works. Okay. So we're down on to number 3. Compensation Subcommittee consults with John Edgar, develops a competitive and sustainable package. Let me tell you about the importance of this. Competitive and sustainable. We'll talk about sustainable first. That's a little bit easier. Recently, I was engaged in a conversation with a priest who was applying to come here, and he had only been in his cure, his parish, for about a year and 3 months. And he says, no doubt you're going to notice my tenure of the place where I am. He says, when I arrived, they were not transparent about their finances. It wasn't until he arrived where he discovered they were going to be posting an $85,000 deficit the first year. And they projected that to continue for further time, but they only had so much money in the bank. So this priest met with his bishop, and he said, Bishop, I can't in good conscience stay here because it was a smaller parish. I'm the most expensive thing on their budget, and they're going to be broke in a year and a half. And so the bishop gave him permission to search for a new calm. And so John will always look for sustainability and viability. We really want that. There are times when we know a parish is going to maybe perhaps engage in a little bit of deficit moving into a new future, but the hope is always is that the new priest is also going to help bring that around. This is what happens when priests leave, people return, right? It's just the nature of ministry. And when a priest leaves, no matter how well loved they were, there will be some people who left when they got there for whatever reason, and they'll come back. So we see this ebb and flow, and things will begin to level out. But John's purpose is to help a congregational subcommittee on compensation to figure out where their number is. And it's really important to do that is heavy work, and get it right. Just as important as it is for the 2 profiles, and I'll tell you why. Right now, how many of you read Episcopal News Service? Okay. Y'all need to subscribe. It's free. It's on email. In June, they published a report, I think it came from Executive Committee of the Episcopal Church, about what it looks like in the deployment world right now for clergy. I just came back from 5 days at Camp Allen on a bivocational ministry conference, and we had the priest who actually works for the National Church as their data scientist, and he reiterated these numbers. The image they used in June in the Episcopal News Service article was that right now, imagine an escalator. And the escalator is the active ministry life right now in our church. There are more clergy at the top of the escalator stepping off than there are at the bottom getting on. Many of our clergy who are entering the ordained ranks or late vocation. Now, I was 35 when I was ordained a priest, kind of late vocation. Had to get my life together, figure out some things. Then there was a time where we had a lot of 20s and 30s, but that's kind of tapered off. If you come to our ordinations in the diocese, you see usually many people are a little bit older, so they're coming in at a different time. So right now we have this escalator with a lot of people getting off. I'm a baby boomer. I just turned 65 a couple months ago. And no, I'm not retiring. I've got 2 younger kids, and I like doing what I'm doing, and I plan to go at least till 70 or 72. God willing, my body still holds up. It's in pretty good nick right now. So we have this time where it's very competitive. I mentioned earlier housing. Y'all don't own a rectory. I would encourage you, one thing that's you'll start seeing again in this part of the world is because of the cost of homes, returning to rectories, because it makes it easier for a cleric to move. 2 occasions we've moved, our last 2 calls, and we had to carry 2 mortgages. Luckily, I'm a saver and my wife is a saver. Luckily, most of the time, my wife has been able to work. There was a period when she couldn't. But when we moved here, she worked in a bank, and as soon as we closed on the house, the bank was being bought by another bank, and everything was up in the air, and so we were carrying 2 mortgages when we first got here, and then we moved to Minneapolis, the same thing, and that was for 11 months for one, 12 months for another. That's a heavy lift for many people. So if you have a rectory, and there was a move in the 80s to get away from rectories and to get to having your own house, but sometimes, like if you serve Abbeville, Louisiana, you don't want to buy a house there unless you're planning to spend your whole life there, because it's really hard to sell a house in some communities. So I will tell you that as y'all do any of your stewardship and you do planned giving, talk about the reality of giving a house. Sometimes the house also can produce cash input. That's not part of this talk, but I'll just tell you that one of the challenges we have is real estate. I once was applying for a job in San Diego. It was about 20 years ago, and they basically said, if you don't already live in this county or have substantial equity, don't even bother applying because you cannot afford to live here. And in some of our communities, it's getting that way. Even rental properties. I know what rental properties are here because I've been working with some priests here on that. You know, it's a challenge. So it's just a reality that we need to think about. Give you some numbers, only because I'm transparent, not because I want to get you sad or anything, just so we know. And this is why you really want to do the very best that you can on your profile answers and writing your profiles, and also your compensation. So we are in Province 4. So that's sort of the southeast of the United States. In Province 4, there were 8 clergy who were searching for calls among 123 openings. Go to the Northeast. My best friend Tim Hodap works for the Diocese of Connecticut doing the same work I do and other work. And most of their positions are part-time. A friend of mine in New York, a lot of part-time. Friend who does the work, my friend Denise in San Francisco, Diocese of California. She had a great position that wasn't being filled. And, you know, we even have a rectory, but it was the cost of living. So these are things that we have to think about. So it's very competitive right now. Y'all are a great church. Look at this building you have. This is a fantastic, I can't wait to see the gathering place. But this is a wonderful space, yeah? Thank you, Father John. Hope that you feel that. You feel that love. Yeah. Mwah! Right. So that's just the lay of the land. What you have from me is a commitment to work closely with your vestry and search committee. Just a little bit more. I only communicate with Paula right now. I don't get looped into group emails through the whole vestry. And when the search committee is formed, I cannot, unless Paula is the chair of it, I won't be speaking to your senior warden about the search, unless there's a hiccup or an issue, and then usually I'll have a meeting with the senior warden and the search chair. During the search, I only communicate with the search chair. It's not because I'm so special, but what I've realized is sometimes people create emails and either intentionally or unintentionally leave someone off. For instance, our own staff, someone grabbed my iCloud address. I don't know where they got it from because I never use it. And they sent something out for our diocesan convention, and I just happened to check that iCloud the other day, and there was something that had gone through a few days ago. So I'm just real careful about how I communicate. So it's always the senior warden until the search begins. Search begins, it's the search chair. And then when the call is ready to be made, then it's the senior warden and I. Okay? And that just helps that, you know, if anyone has a question, the vestry has a question, it goes through Paula. And if the search committee has a question, it'll go through the search chair. Now, if you have co-chairs, which is sometimes a good thing because it means sharing the labor, it works really well, then I would communicate with both of them. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay. Right, we're still on page 1. You know, it's going to go faster. But this is all good. I hope you think it's good because this is for your edification. So under 3, you'll see 2 little smaller blocks. Sometimes it just depends on how every parish is in timing and when it's right. Sometimes it has to do with seasonality, all sorts of things. About the time of block number 3 is usually oftentimes when the rector is leaving, and it just really depends on where you are. So it's not a hard and fast that they all coincide, but the lower two blocks talk about when it could happen. I know Father Ray left early. He left right after Easter, didn't he, in April? Or May. He took his sabbatical or vacation and then left, right? So then you have your self-study. You engage Holy Cow. Y'all have done that. Vestry approves a Holy Cow plan and agreement. That's been done. Self-study launches in 10 days. That's great. And your interim rector, Colleen Tully, will be arriving in September, whom I know, but I had to, because we were in Minnesota during the same time together. And so we have a lot of common friends. So that you have someone very good who's going to be here with you, and you've been blessed with clergy to help you during this time since Father Ray left. So then we go to block 5 on page 2. Vestries invite search committee applications. You're already doing that. You're right now in the time of your vestries discerning. Or what's the closing date?
Subcommittee is discerning the application.
Let me tell you why applications work. I was a very active layperson. I was on vestries and everything else. My mom was on the vestry. My uncle was on the vestry of my home church. You know, it was very incestuous in Louisiana at times in all sorts of ways. But you're listening. That's good. Oftentimes, I have seen, even when I was a senior associate, when they had a search committee looking for a rector, or when I was in a search and I was hearing little rumblings through people, that selection of search committee members sometimes can be very subjective versus objective. And to have applications, you're creating a ethos of objectivity, that you're not going to be choosing people because of who they're married to, or if they're a big pledger, or if they've been there for 55 years, or whatever else. Your vestry has created criteria that they're looking for, and the people who best meet that criteria on their paper when they apply. And then they'll have some other criteria, and I can't speak to everything because I don't know what theirs have been. It could be making sure there's a good representation from, say, your Saturday service, your Sunday service, you know, age differential. I don't know how much of an age differential you have. Where's the young man that was here earlier today? You know, so he dropped it down. Usually when our daughter goes to church with us, and Adrian would have come with me, but it's an hour and 40 minutes this morning, and I can't do that to her unless we're spending the night somewhere. But whenever Olivia would come with us when she was in high school, it was like, wow, you just dropped our median age, you know? And that's okay. Here's one thing I'll tell you. Not every parish has to strive to have young people. We have to realize there's effective, life-giving ministry, engaging God's mission with people of a certain age group. You know, you represent your demographics. It's great when you have stuff when the grandkids are coming for a visit. But you can't always beat yourself up and say, why don't we have more young people? You have who you have, who you have. You minister to those that you have. And you excel versus being mediocre. That's all. Okay? I got off track. Sorry about that. So that's why they do search committee applications. The vestry will announce their search committee members. When's that happening?
The committee is meeting August 20th to choose a slate, and then it's going to come to the vestry meeting the 4th Tuesday of August that's a great choice. And then we'll announce after that.
And I would say anyone that has applied, this is what I told the vestry, is that if someone applies, did not get selected, it's a great opportunity to offer that person to have some other role. For instance, when you make a call, a hospitality team is critical. You know, helping a new priest for her or his family to come and get settled, find accommodation. And if they have kids, help them learn about the school, what are the school options. There's lots of stuff when a new priest comes, because I've done this a lot as the person as the new priest, how you welcome people really can determine how the relationship carries on. Doing it well is a good thing. And so if someone doesn't get on the search committee, sometimes that's a blessing because they dodged a bullet, because there are other fun things to do. There's all sorts of stuff to do. So just because if someone doesn't get on, don't think that it's over. And then the search committee also will be given a charge by the vestry, and I would recommend you do that at that meeting when you all accept them, how many finalists you want. Because there's nothing, we don't dictate how many finalists. One of the things I talked with the vestry about is that if you have, what's the ideal number of finalists? Between 3 and 5. No more than 5 because it can be a bit daunting. No less than 3 because at least if you have 3, you have candidate A, B, and C, they're being compared to the criteria that you as the people of God here at Iona Hope have established for who your next priest should be. But if you have only 2, you're going to compare A to B. And the criteria up here may not be reflected. So I do encourage you to, if you can, sometimes it just happens where you can't help but you only have 2, because I will tell you a story. One of our one of our big congregations, not major, because every congregation is major and important, but it was a big congregation, multi-staff. They did a search, 3 finalists. One finalist reaches out and says, I've decided, and they just retired from an institution of higher learning in the Episcopal Church, I'm going to take some more time to be with my family. Okay, that left us with 2. Then another candidate, who was a friend of mine from Upper South Carolina, he calls me and he says, I'm now a finalist in an Episcopal election, and I cannot in good conscience continue in conversation with this faith community knowing that this other thing is happening concurrently. So he withdrew. And then the last candidate, who was stellar, accepted a call. So we did restart, and they got the priest that God wanted them to have all along. Somebody I had asked to apply, and initially they didn't reply, and it is going great guns. I will tell you also that generally nowadays, most priests, if they're in a search, are probably in at least 2 other searches. I had one time I was in 5 at the same time. You don't control that, it's just the way it happens. And, the priest is only in control of what they can be in control of their own inner discernment. You don't know what's happening on the parish level as well. Any questions on that? Clear? All right. So we move over to column 6. So anyway, y'all need to make sure the vestry says how many they need to have. 3 to 5, no more, okay? Self-study concludes. The profile subcommittee produces both profiles. That goes pretty quickly. Once the Holy Cow work is done, I commend to your leadership to really get it going well and quickly, because this is where we see ourselves getting a little bit tardy in some congregations. They have trouble meeting, they haven't decided who's writing, so you decide who's going to be authoring things. The subcommittees don't have to be comprised solely of vestry members, but it needs to be coordinated by vestry members or chaired by vestry members. Oftentimes you can have someone in the congregation who's a good writer. Worked with one congregation, and as I'm reading the OTM profile, there were clearly 5 different voices, and some were far worse than other voices, to the point one person was responding in the first person, which they were supposed to be responding we. And so I had to send it back, and this went back and forth, and that one person got angry. They thought I was picking on them. I said, no, you're just writing from your experience, not the congregation's experience. And so just really paying attention to that is an important thing, okay? And so just making sure you have one person who takes all the writing and it becomes that one voice, okay? But if you get behind on that, that delay affects everything else, okay? And I don't want you to be time sensitive. Mother Colleen is coming, and she's here through the spring, correct? Should be good, okay? All right. I review the profiles. I'll edit for appearance, language, grammar, everything. I'm a former school teacher as well, so I just look at all these things. Ask my kids when they write letters, I'd say, show me the letters you're writing to your grandmother. No. But anyway, the vestry approves the profile because, see, the profiles belong to the vestry. They're what you're going to hand over to the search committee, okay? Vestry also has to approve the website. How many people working on your website? One person or 3? Good, okay. Are y'all taking input on it, or is this a thing that's done within the vestry, or how are you?
We're going to do a big review, like have people reading each section of
Right.
the website. There's 3 administrators of the website.
Okay. Once the profile is done and dusted and it's ready to go live, I will meet with the search committee. And I prefer to do it in person if I can, but I can do it electronically as well. It's not imperative, but I like to be able to watch the room, see how everyone's, I like to read the table, as it were. The search committee goes live, usually 4 to 5 weeks. No less than 4, no more than 6.5. You notice I kind of 6.5'd it. Reason being, sometimes you can go live at a period of winter vacations, school vacations. I look at it as the priest, when they see this, what is their parish and personal life going to be like when they can actually give it attention? For instance, one that's going live will be going for 5.5 weeks, only because we're still in the summer. And we have Labor Day holiday to get through by the time it closes. So I said, let's go 1 more week. 4 weeks is really not quite enough time. Priest sees it, maybe they don't see it because it goes up on ENS, or their bishop tells them about it, or their best friend calls them and says, hey, Mary, have you heard about this place down in Iona Hope, down in Fort Myers? It's a great church. But yet they're in the middle of doing their capital campaign, or they've just launched something at the parish, for the fall that's taking a lot of their time and effort. So that's why we say, 4 to 5 weeks is good. I err on the side of 5 weeks. 6 if you have to. It's okay. 6 weeks people can live with. So we're on page 3. When people apply, no one should apply directly to the church. All right? In the old days, they did. When I was first ordained as a priest in 93 at 35, I can remember some search committees telling me, well, you're one of 35 applicants. All the application packages would go to the search committee or the vestry, depends how they structured. They would make their selection of their top 4 to 7, and then they would send it to their bishop. And then the bishop would start to make bishop-to-bishop phone calls. And inevitably, with many searches, there were 1 or 2 people in that boiled down lot who, for whatever reason, their bishop would not recommend them to another parish. We have a saying amongst my colleagues, don't throw any dead cats over anyone else's fence. We have seen where it's happened in my 30 years where people have been in a search and it's only at the tail end that a bishop reveals something. So a number of years ago, probably 15 years ago, the Episcopal Church, by agreement, it's not canonical, I do what's called an initial red flag check on anyone that I think should proceed as an applicant before I meet with the bishop to talk about the applicants. I just did a couple of those this week, and I had someone else did a couple with me, because we're going to be honest. And I can say, no red flags, but if this person proceeds as an applicant, you may want to ask the search committee to ask this person how they handle conflict. Or are they collaborative? Or do they like to control? So I can paint some parameters of questions that they would do well, but I'm not going to reveal anything. But it's just what I know about that person, growing edges. And then the search committee has to do, because search committees really have to ask the right questions, don't they? Because when a search committee doesn't, expectations aren't met. And that goes on both sides. The clergy person may feel like, wow, they're not asking. I once was in a church, and they weren't asking very meaningful questions. I said, do they not care? And then the other way, you could be not asking the good questions. How do you deal with conflict? Or do you have any business acumen? Because there are some parishes where the clergy person needs to have some, as the rector or priest in charge, you have the chair of the vestry. You're a fiduciary officer. You have your obligations. And so, do they know how to read a balance sheet? Can they read a profit and loss? A chart of accounts, little simple things like this. So those are the things that we would share. And if I do that with my colleague, they'll transmit that down to their bishop and then perhaps even to the search committee. So I present candidates. The search committee engages with the candidates. Now, let me tell you, before the search committee gets the candidates, I sit down with my bishop. I've done this with Bishop Dabney, I've done it with Bishop Doug, and I'll have my pool of candidates, and I have all their materials, and I've given him those same packets of information, and then I'll tell him what the red flag checks said, and then I'll tell him what I think. Either we can give all of them with no hesitation, or do we say we have the A group, the B group, or the C group, or here's the A group and one or two, but you need to be prepared to really tell the bishop, if you call that person, what you really love about that person. Does that make sense to you? So it's to try to guide. And the bishop gives me approval of who I can present. I meet with the search committee, and then I hand over the packets, and I give them what information I can, and I remind them how to proceed. So if anyone applies that doesn't move forward to the search committee, it is my obligation to release them. We don't say cut. We don't say kicked off. We release them. But once I hand them to the search committee, I don't have to communicate those people. It becomes the search committee's obligation to communicate with them, okay? And sometimes I can decide not to proceed with anyone. It could be I had a guy one time, he had $220,000 in student loans. I said, but you're applying for a position that's paying $60,000. How can you service that debt? I'm not worried, it's educational debt. I'm just going to forget about it. I said, no, we can't do that. Okay. So we'll do a red flag check, goes to the search committee, and then the search committee engages. And that night, usually it's an evening, or if it's a vestry that likes to meet in the daytime, I can make that work. I just tell them that when I leave the meeting, I'm going to email all those candidates and say, I've transmitted your materials to the search committee. And that search committee, that night or the next day, really needs to communicate and say, we are delighted to let you know we just received your materials. Don't leave it hanging, because I'm here to tell you, there's enough people who don't respond to emails these days in searches or job applications, right? That we're not going to model that bad behavior. And so that's where it goes from there. And if they get released during the ongoing process of the search, then that's down to the search committee to communicate. You get down to your finalist. Yes, ma'am.
Is there a number of applicants that usually gets transmitted?
Can you use the mic?
Yeah, you got the mic.
Sorry. Thank you. Is there a number of candidates that usually gets transmitted to the search team, average?
No, you know, the number of candidates is determined by geographic locale in our diocese, the number, compensation number, time of the year. This is a good time of the year to be doing a search, because often there are 2 times of the year when people like to move, after Christmas and after Easter. Priests really want to go through the high holy days with their parishes, even when they're leaving, and they say, you know, my departure was announced before Easter, but I arrived here 2 Sundays after Easter, because that's something in our makeup. We like to hit those days. And so, no, it can have anywhere from 20, you know, I could have 30 applicants and maybe give 12. With the climate now, with the economy and things right now, it's between 3 and 9. That's okay, though. Think about the pool that's out there. It's representative of who's available.
We had 37 last time.
Hey, speak with the microphone.
Hang on. It's on. It's for the people at home. We had 37.
That you received from the diocese.
Yes.
And what year was that?
2010, 11? No, 13, 14. 14. Yep, 14.
Yeah, those days.
Gone.
Not gone. I don't know what you were like then. I can tell you, we had I had 25 applicants for a place when I first got here, but it was an extraordinary parish. You're not extraordinary, but it was a very financially hefty parish as well. It made it very attractive for some people. And it's timing. Timing is huge. What part of the year? Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir. And your name is?
Pat Hunt.
Okay.
With some shortages I've read of available Episcopal clergy during searches, And considering that the Episcopal Church is in communion with the Lutheran Church,
No, not the Lutheran Church. We have a concordant with the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. We have to be really clear.
yes, yes.
Because there's Missouri Synod, Wisconsin Synod.
Gotcha.
Yep.
would the national church or the diocese consider calling a Lutheran clergy?
They could never be a rector,
Right.
because canonically you have to be an Episcopal priest to be a rector. They could only be priest in charge, which means they don't have what we would call in the secular world tenure. We have a partnership of one church, as y'all know here. That relationship is on the uptick now. We've done a lot of work on relations, and so that's looking very positive. It has happened. They're facing some of the same things we are as a main line. It's a great question, though. Okay? Yes, Allison.
Given that same question, could you very briefly outline the difference between a rector and a priest in charge?
Yeah, great question. Rectors and priests in charge have the same canonical, that is, church law, rights, privileges, and obligations. Anywhere from hiring a staff to control of the worship space. Priest in charge, like a rector, can decide the music, the liturgy. Smart rectors usually work in tandem with their music minister. Who's our music minister here? Is anybody? Well, one of the jokes I always tell when I was interviewing, I did this at the Cathedral of Minneapolis when I was meeting with the Canon musician. I said, you know the difference between a terrorist and an organist? You can negotiate with a terrorist. I come from a musical background. I've worked in cathedrals and big churches, but I always like to see how the organist is going to react on that. But so a priest in charge and rector have similar obligations and privileges. It's tenure. Oftentimes priests in charge, some priests in charge are called with the provision to be called as rector. So we sometimes, to use Michael Durning, my predecessor's language, we call that the rent-to-own program. Now, the downside is that the clergy person's taking all the risk. Because if they move here and say it's a 3-year letter of agreement with the option for the vestry to extend the call as a rector, that priest all of a sudden may have moved their family here, sold their house, bought a house, and yet they're on a shorter thing. It's worked wonderfully. I can tell you Alex Andahar at St. Vincent's, Mother Janet Tennell at All Saints in Tarpon Springs. Who's the most recent one? Oh, who is it now that we just had that? Oh, here, North Fort Myers. Brian Cleary has been called as rector at All Souls. And so we see where that works. It's not the best way to go always, but there's the difference. Priest in charge also, you can have a priest in charge, such as Mother Tully when she comes, very job specific, a beginning and an end date. Okay? Does that answer enough? Anybody? Yeah? Okay. Any other questions before I move us down the road? All right. When it comes to the search finalist, I'll get a call from the search chair and they'll say, we're down to our finalists. I'll say, tell me who they are. I say, okay, I will talk to the bishop and I'll ask for permission for you to proceed with those people. And what will have to happen if he says, yes, they're good, then I have to have a background check. And our background checks are done by an agency, external agency. It's criminal and financial. Both are hugely important. You know, I told you about that priest who had applied. It was only when we did the financial I saw his debt load. And so we look at that. Because also all of our clergy are required to renew their background check every 5 years. And I review all that information. If something catches my eye, I have to have a conversation with somebody. And so once those come in clear, I say to the bishop, Bishop Doug, background checks on all 5 are good. Then he picks up the phone and talks to his counterpart bishop. Because bishops will tell even more truth, or sometimes they can tell more truth because it's bishop to bishop. Most canons, like I am, we know everything, but there's some things, even when I know it, I can't talk about it. I will say, like if someone does a red flag check, here's one, I'll say, no red flags, but your bishop needs to speak to my bishop because something came up. Bishops will do that, and once he gives the okay, then the search chair can meet with the vestry and say, and y'all decide how it could be the whole search committee comes to the vestry. That's up to y'all how you want to do it. We offer options in the handbook how you might do it. Presents the candidates. And then I work with your senior warden, and I'm assuming, I don't know you're going to be senior warden whenever it happens, but I keep pointing at your senior warden now. The senior warden reaches out to me, and I help coordinate visits. I have, having been in a lot of searches, I can tell you what works well and what doesn't work well, what clergy appreciate, what they don't appreciate. And because we were in searches before we had kids, we were married 10 years before kids, and then when we had kids. And there's different factors you have to take in consideration. And then you begin coordinating the visit. And when a candidate comes, they have to meet with the bishop if they're not already serving in this diocese. Before COVID, part of the search would have been to send a contingent to a candidate's home church. Here's the problem with that now. Not everyone's feeling comfortable always to travel as much. We also learned during COVID that we can do a lot of surreptitious study of candidates by jumping on a Facebook and seeing how they teach. Or how do they lead morning prayer when the newborn baby was up with colic all night, and there you see the rector with bleary eyes and messed up hair, unshaven, just trying to be a priest in the morning, you know? When you do a visit, it's very artificial. That priest, she or he knows you're coming. They're going to get the volunteers in the church, make sure that church is spotless. They're going to make sure their vestments are pressed. They're going to know weeks in advance, they're going to be working on that sermon like they will have never worked on any other sermon or will ever work on a sermon in the future. I'm here to tell you, it's artificial. And then also, if the parish don't know, and they're sending a big contingent, they could stand out like a sore thumb. Minnesota, I was the senior canon. I was a canon liturgist, the COO of the congregation. We have 1,400 members. The dean left under bad circumstances. He melted down in 2011. I was the only priest for 6 months for 1,400 people. I was beginning to discern to leave. I did not want to be the dean there as much as I loved that congregation because I knew they needed a clean break. And so there was this one church from the deep south that came up with 12 search committee members. Now, we had 3 liturgies on a Sunday morning, and they were able to split up. But after every liturgy, I had people coming up to me saying, Canon Richard, are you looking for a job? Because we had all these people at this early service, and they all sound like you from down south. It was okay, though, because I wasn't the rector. People knew I was, not everyone heard it, but I was very open that it was time for me to discern. However, most rectors are not going to tell their leadership because if they don't get the call, they can become a lame duck in many ways. Horrible language, but that's what it is. It can also hurt relationships. People think, you don't love us anymore. That's not it at all. Discernment is discernment. It's not about love or hate or like or dislike. So we found during COVID, we weren't doing that. And we've had very good calls with priests because you can do it. You can worship online, generally, if you like that. I will be honest, worshiping online does not float my boat or my family's boat. We tried it. It just does not work for us as a family. So that's just the way it is. Not everyone's that way. Learning, teaching online, you can learn all kinds of things around the back way, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. To give you that, what you do get from a priest when you go visit them in their in situ, you can see the energy they give off. You can also look at the congregation. Are they bored to tears? Are they doodling while they're preaching or whatever else? But what we do is we allow you to have an informal Eucharist with the search committee and the vestry together so that those leaders can experience. Back in the day, before I went to seminary, we used to do the dog and pony, and all the candidates would come into the church. I remember we had 3 finalists for my church. And each one of them came on different Sundays, and they celebrated and preached. And let me tell you what the reviews were that I heard. And I was, 20-something. Oh, I don't like his beard. Or, oh, looks way too young. Or, bored to tears. Or, I couldn't understand what that accent they have because they're from the north. Whatever. So we say you can have that service so at least the leadership get the opportunity to experience Would I say informal? It would be, here in this space, a standing Eucharist, probably just a gospel, but so they can see how they take a service, as we would say back when I was in England. That was one thing, they always want to know if we were being appointed, how do you take a service? I had people when I was appointed by the Lord Bishop to a new place, people I didn't recognize were coming, we just want to see how you take a service because you've been announced as our vicar. I said, great. So that's how that works. And the other thing it does save you a lot of money because searches can be very expensive when you start flying people because you're flying a search committee team, then your finalists come in. It's not just about the money, but it's about being good stewards, right? So you can do the work you need to do. Now, if your search committee really wants to do an on-site visit, you have to do them with all the candidates. You can't say you have an applicant from this diocese and you say, we're going to send a team to St. Swithin's by the swamp because it's in our diocese. And I will say, that's okay, but you have to send a team to the Allegheny Mountains and to the Sierra Nevada. You do it for one, you have to do it for the other, okay? It just makes it fair. Any questions on that? Wearing you out, okay, good. So, and I'll provide what those search visits look like when it comes, just a model, and your vestry gets to decide. The vestry elects. I have a model for electing. I'll tell you how I like to recommend doing it. When it comes to an election, it could be you have 3 finalists that have come in, and it could be your search committee wants to make a recommendation of one of the 3, or say we commend all 3 equally. That's internal. But I like the vestry to, if they can, come into church. Everyone's given a piece of paper and a writing instrument. There's an alms basin on the altar. Perhaps someone leads the group in a prayer. And then when people are moved, they write down the name of the person that God has told them should be their rector. And each person takes it, puts it in the plate, and then the junior and senior warden take the plate, say back there or wherever, where they could count. And only the junior and senior warden usually know the actual count, because here's the thing, when the election happens, it has to be recorded in the minutes of the vestry. And one thing you don't want is a record of saying, how many on your vestry? 7. So it was 4-3. And you don't want anyone to walk out saying a month later, well, I never voted for them. Or for that priest to read records later and find the vote. What I always recommend is that y'all vote the vestry to say that whoever gets the majority is unanimous, and it's recorded as unanimous, because no new priest wants to know that a portion of the vestry did not vote for them. And also, no one has the right for a parking lot meeting a month, 2 months, 6 months, or a year later saying, I never voted for them. That just doesn't float, okay? But that's internal. But it's a helpful way to do it. And then I have a method for how they have to notify me, then I call the bishop, and then formally the senior warden has to notify the bishop, but I walk them and I give them all the language and emails of how to do this. And then the hard part, not the hard part, but the less fun part is just negotiating of the letter of agreement. And again, I work on that because I'll review that before it's signed, and then the bishop approves it. And once the bishop approves, that's when the announcement goes at the church they're serving, and from this church, hopefully at the exact same day and same time, so that no one group announces before the other. When I was called here, we sent a letter out on Thursday, hard letter, USPS. Friday at 11:30 in the morning in Louisiana, and at 12:30 here, the diocese sent their notice at 12:30 via email. We sent ours at 11:30, and then on Sunday, I announced it personally. This way, I was trying to cover all the bases. People who don't do email, people who do email, people who are out of town, and then the people who would hear it for the first time in church on Sunday. So everyone should have had it about the same time. And I'll just remind the senior warden when it comes time, negotiate that announcement, because it's really important. Because a parish of a departing priest does not need to find out by one of their friends in Southwest Florida, and it's happened. Right? Because people have feelings, and we have to treat everyone with respect. The rector's announced. Can talk with the senior warden how those announcements happen. Usually at some point in time, the interim departs before the new rector arrives, just to give some space for the new priest to arrive. Usually you have some supply priest or a retired priest in a congregation helping out so that people can begin to let go of that time, get ready for a new time. And if you have supply coming in, it's really nice if they're available because you have different voices and different styles. Because when the new priest arrives, you're going to have to get used to a new voice and new style, right? And it's during that in-between time is when your people who perhaps weren't elected to the search committee can begin getting ready to welcome a new priest so that she or he and their family arrives safely and well loved. Okay? That was a lot. You listened well. Questions? Microphone so everyone can hear you. I'll take a sip of water.
My name is Ken Ingram. Just a real brief question. Who and how is an associate determined?
That is a great question. Who is an associate to a priest? A rector or priest in charge gets to hire all the clergy and determines when their time is finished. They serve at the pleasure of that priest. Okay? Is that enough of an answer?
Yes.
Okay. It's like me. I serve at the pleasure of the bishop. So it's the old days when I was first ordained a priest, it used to be that, all the staff would give letters of resignation just to make it easier if there was anything like that. We don't do that anymore. I had an associate. When I got there, I realized, she says, really, I've been functioning as the co-rector. And I said, Catherine, let's just be clear. The canons of the church only designate a rector. And you need to be clear that if you cannot serve as an associate under my supervision, then you know what you will have to do. So it's just sometimes there's some muddled understandings, but it's the priest who's in charge of the parish hires all the staff. A good priest will also take counsel of leadership, the elected lay leadership. But sometimes being a rector or a priest in charge can be very lonely because sometimes you have to make hard decisions about staffing or direction of a parish. And sometimes you just have to be the rector. And that's why curates, associates becoming rectors don't always work. Because the first time you put on the rector hat, when they've known you as the curate associate they've loved, because that curate associate never had to make the hard decisions. And when you make that, that's where you lose some relationships oftentimes. Not always. Okay. Questions? So what were the other things I was supposed to talk about from your list?
Oh, it's on here.
Yeah. Remember she said it was all in her brain. She was going to ask me, right?
No, to-do list is, we are visioning the future with the CAT, how the search team will function independently, you talked about.
Right.
How a call is eventually made.
And let's be clear. The search committee does not elect a rector. The vestry elects a rector. And I will tell you, almost every search committee I've worked with, at some point in time, we get to somewhere they're thinking that's their job. And I have to remind them that that is not your ministry. Your ministry is to present candidates. Go ahead, Paula, sorry.
Search team's interaction with the church.
So I would recommend, once we go live, that y'all decide as a vestry but somebody needs to make announcements at each of the service. Just a brief update. Put it also on your website, because I'm here to tell you, candidates are tracking all that. They're watching how much progress you're making as you go through the process, okay? I used to keep these matrices, because when I was in those 5 searches that time, I couldn't keep straight, and so I had my little categories. It just reminded me. They're going to be watching. You don't want to reveal how many candidates you have. You don't want to reveal anything numerically that pares down the knowledge too much. You can talk in broad terms and say, even as senior warden, you can tell the congregation, y'all know we met with the Canon ordinary. He answered some questions and talked too long. Any others?
Vestry's role in the search process.
Hands off. Yep.
Confidentiality of search team.
Muy importante, okay? Ministries can be really hurt if anyone violates a confidence. Here's the thing. I was at this conference, and I met people who went to school with my cousin or whatever who's a priest. This is all what happens. If people on the search committee talk to a friend or their spouse, and I don't recommend spouses be on a search committee because of pillow talk, or a spouse with a vestry member, because where's that gonna? There's no clarity. Confidentiality. You can't talk about names because if their leadership don't know, it could just kill the remainder of their ministry there. Yes, it seems like you're stepping out on a spouse for some people, but really it's about God's discernment, discerning God's will for you. What else is on your list, Paula?
The final question is timing, but what should the parish expect in terms of communications from the search team as it's going along? And then the last question is timing.
Yeah, weekly. It doesn't hurt to just give a weekly update, because you know what? There's probably somebody who wasn't in church last week. And you could give the same thing. Y'all have a email newsletter? I need to get on that. I don't think I get that. So I usually get it from most parishes. That's how I find out all kind of cool stuff, and then I can say, Bishop, did you know this was happening? No. But it's just, I like to know what's happening if y'all are having some cool stuff happening. Weekly, even if it just means no change from last week, just let you know, because you have committed to give a weekly announcement. Does it need to be the same person because you have a Sunday afternoon service and then you have only one service on a Sunday, or two normally?
Two Sunday, one Saturday.
So what I would do is find a way and read from a script. All my years as a rector, my announcements were never off the cuff, because you can just have a brain, merging senior moments, and then you forgot or you say the wrong thing. If you have a script, and that way whoever's reading it at the Saturday service can read it at one or both of the Sunday services. So there's no question. Timing. One church that began their search initially, they received candidates in February. We restarted the search because they felt that the candidates they received were not what they were looking for. I will tell you also, they had to raise what they were offering because they were not offering enough. And the bishop and I said, you really need to offer more, because otherwise you're going to get... It's hard to be nice about it, but that's the reality. So they restarted, and then I gave them their new candidates beginning of the summer, and now they're down to a finalist. It all depends on how fast the profiles are written. We've got Christmas coming up, so if you're you start August 17th, you finish, are they telling you 4 or 5 weeks on your assessment? 4? Okay. So then that will be mid-September. I'm thinking out loud here. And then if you go from mid-September to allow 4 weeks to get everything written, that's fair enough, because we have a convention also coming up, and we have other things in the diocese. So October, you could be interviewing finalists at Christmas. It just depends. I don't want to say I have a crystal ball that tells you exactly how long, because we never know. I told you the story, 3 excellent finalists, and then all 3 pulled out for various reasons. It does happen. Not a lot, but it does. And if it does happen, remember, it's not because we're in control. God is the one who is with us in all this. And this is not your church. This is God's church. As a priest, I always had to remember, it's not my church. It's the church I serve. And these are the people I was privileged to walk with and to share ministry with. Okay? But that's my take on it. Not everyone agrees, perhaps, on that. Any other questions? Y'all been great. How's our time? Oh, sorry, so late. Wow.
Anything online?
There are no questions from anyone online.
Oh, okay. And if people come by your office, you can give them that documentation. I just don't put it up on the website, but the documents I gave out, those are yours to keep. Okay. All right, I'm going to go one more time. Any more questions? Then I have a prayer I'd like to close with. May I do that? Okay. Let me just pull this up real quick. Here we go. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Disturb us, Lord, when we are too well pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we dreamed too little, when we arrived safely because we sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, when with the abundance of things that we possess, we have lost our thirst for the waters of life. We have ceased to dream of eternity. In our efforts to build a new earth, we have allowed our vision of the new heaven to dim. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture on wilder seas, where storms will show your mastery, where losing sight of land we shall find the stars. We ask you to push back the horizons of our hopes and to push back the future in strength, courage, hope, and love. This we ask in the name of our captain, who is Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen. Sir Francis Drake, 1577.
Everybody, please join me in thanking Canon Norman for the
Y'all are
generosity of
great.
his time and assistance to us.
Thank you.